Hello and welcome to Viewpoint. In a historic week, the Gibraltar Parliament has fired the starting pistol for the process of ratifying the treaty in the UK. The government said it may not be a perfect deal, but it's the best one they were able to negotiate under the circumstances. The opposition said while it brought opportunities, it also brings many challenges. The treaty was passed unanimously, but the government and opposition remain divided on many of the issues. Helping us analyse the week's events and what the future holds is former Chief Minister Sir Peter Caruana. Thank you for joining me. And also our news editor, Christine Vasquez, who is joining me once again. Thank you very much. You can let us know your thoughts on Viewpoint at gbc.gi. So, Sir Peter, on this very historic week, I wanted to ask you a question. If you had brought back this deal many years ago, what do you think the reaction would have been?
I can feel the noose tightening around my neck just by listening to you ask me a question. I think the question attracts such an obvious answer, Ross, that I don't think that your viewers need me to answer it.
No, I think they do. Let's hear it. Come on.
Well, I don't expect that the current government in opposition would have been quite as magnanimous about the deal as they are about it when describing it as their deal. But look, that is history. I think this has been a very good week for Gibraltar. I support this deal, as I've said publicly already. I thought the debate in Parliament yesterday showed that we're a mature political community. I think the government is to be congratulated on agreeing to amend its own motion, to introduce the conditionality of the request for ratification, that we should be in control of the trigger for terminating the treaty.
Are you assured
and the
by
exercise
that?
of all the powers. I think Gibraltar was in a much better place on Wednesday morning than it was on Tuesday morning, frankly. Since it seems to be fashionable, from having listened to the debate in Parliament yesterday, since it seems to be fashionable for Gibraltar politicians to slip into Spanish, I think this ex-Gibraltar politician can do so too. Yo creo que podemos estar bastante más tranquilo with the Concordat. Of course, the Concordat has not yet been brought home. There are very helpful noises coming out of London. Parliament's request to ratify, and here is in the safety net, Parliament's request to the UK to ratify is conditional on a satisfactory Concordat coming back. I think the government should be transparent with Gibraltar on the terms of that Concordat when it arrives. The resolution calls for consultation with the leader of the opposition. I hope that the Chief Minister will be persuaded that the consultation and the comfort should be given a little bit more wider than that. But if the Chief Minister can bring back the Concordat, saying the things that I have seen in a draft that represents the Gibraltar government's request to the United Kingdom, then I think that will be a very good deal. A very good deal, and we wait to see whether they can. The advantage of having modified the motion yesterday was that it takes the pressure off the timing. So now, because we've owned, and which is why I called for it on Monday, because if we had passed the resolution with no condition on Monday, the UK would have been on its own to do as it pleased without Gibraltar being able to pull the handbrake. Now, the Chief Minister has weeks, perhaps months, to negotiate the Concordat before the UK actually ratifies this treaty.
Christine, we were saying, weren't we, that it seemed surprising that this Concordat has really, I mean, I don't know how far behind that they were talking about it, but it only seems to have surfaced this week.
So when GBC run its first article, and with the points of the treaty, one of the things that it had in the article was that the EU would give Spain the right to termination, and that there was a Concordat. So the Concordat is nothing new. It has been there, but you do wonder why the Chief Minister couldn't. Well, I know that it's been said that the Middle East has stopped it as well, has delayed it. Why it hasn't been able to have been done a bit earlier?
Well, look, you're absolutely right. The Concordat is not new. I saw a draft of it on Friday, 2 days before my piece in the Chronicle. And I have no doubt that the government has had the Concordat on its table as something that it thought was important to have for some time. That wasn't my point on Monday. My point on Monday was about timing and about loss of leverage, that the House should not pass an unqualified, unconditional resolution because we would lost all leverage in persuading the United Kingdom to give us a Concordat, and the devil is in the detail of the language. The same, you can see it just by reading some of the things that are being said in the House of Lords yesterday.
Stephen Doughty's reply was hypothetical.
Yes, some of the things are very helpful, and I think it shows a direction of travel that I found very encouraging about the prospects of the Chief Minister's likely success in landing this Concordat, to which I attach quite a lot of importance. On the other hand, some of the language did not deliver what the point is in Gibraltar. Take into account, we would. The UK has got to commit that if Gibraltar asks it to do so in a referendum, and frankly I don't think it needs it, I think a referendum is a very good idea, but if Parliament asks it unanimously, I think the United Kingdom should commit to simply say, I will do for Gibraltar what the EU is going to do for Spain, which is simply to throw us out of this arrangement when it no longer suits Spain. Well, why should Spain be in that privileged situation and not Gibraltar, when it's the UK who can give it to us?
The Chief Minister made a very interesting and perhaps obvious point, but I hadn't thought of it. And that's that the Concordat would also be necessary should the UK want to terminate the agreement, and we don't.
Or should a Gibraltar government irresponsibly want to terminate it? We need this is so important. This is a very good week for Gibraltar. Why? Because I think Gibraltar has done something important. It's done something brave. The fact that we are supporting it, Parliament and past chief ministers and representative bodies, the fact that we're supporting means that we've come a long way as a people. We have the confidence to do things that a few years ago might have been inconceivable, and that there are still many people in Gibraltar, including me, who won't like a lot of what is in it. But we have the confidence in ourselves and in our ability to defend ourselves and in the maturity of our political institutions and our ability to persuade the United Kingdom to do the right thing by us, to do things of this sort. And I think that's a great, great news place to be.
So, Peter, if the Concordat, though, is not legally binding, isn't it academic, and you could have a future government in the UK just tearing it up?
Look, by that argument, the preamble to the Constitution and the British assurance on sovereignty is equally non-legally binding. It's legally binding. It's not legally binding, actually, because it's in the preamble. It's not in the text of the Constitution order. But any UK government could repeal the Gibraltar Constitution order and with it the preamble. We've got to accept that the United Kingdom operates to certain standards of morality, and that when a British government commits itself to a people for whom it is ultimately responsible to do or not to do, and in exchange for that persuades those people to do something that they don't like and goes badly wrong for them, I have no doubt that a UK government of any political colour will honour that commitment, and it is not legally binding.
In terms of Gibraltar's constitution, what do we look ahead to now? What parts of this needs to be included in the constitution?
What?
Gibraltar's constitution?
What?
Updating? Well, we've left the EU.
To strengthen it. But
yeah, to strengthen it.
Well, I mean, it would be good to have things strengthened in the Gibraltar constitution. I mean, I don't think there's a huge amount more of constitutional reform to obtain, but if anybody can persuade the British government to give us a bit more, whatever can be achieved would be welcome. I think the clause in the Constitution, I can't remember the number, I think it's section 54 or 45 or something like that, that speaks about EU-related matters not ceasing to be domestic matters, the responsibility of Gibraltar.
Yes, because we left the EU. So.
Because they arise in the context of an EU which is subject to a treaty, does not mean that they cease to be local matters, the responsibility of the government. I think the government it looks to that clause in part in this context. I don't think legally that the clause bites because it's not in the context of the EU in that sense. We're no longer in the EU. I think it would be great if the Chief Minister could, and his colleagues could persuade the United Kingdom government to modify that part to take into account the treaty rather than just a situation that no longer exists. Because when we drafted that clause and got the British government to agree to it, it was in the context of both of us being in the EU.
Former Chief Minister, Sir Peter.
Like
a little
President,
slip there,
right?
sorry.
It's always President.
Let me ask you, you raised a number of points in your article that were concerning, and one of them being boots on the ground. But there were other issues as well, for example, border checks. You mentioned that they would be done at the port. The Chief Minister clarified that they would be done at the airport. Did you hear the Chief Minister's response to you had a prominent position in his speech on Tuesday. I wanted to ask you what you thought of some of the responses and whether you felt assured by the responses that he gave you.
I did hear that debate, and I was struck by how a debate around an issue as important as this could really have turned on people attaching different meanings to the phrase boots on the ground. I support this treaty. I said on Monday that I supported this treaty before I heard the debate on Parliament on Tuesday. My list is not a list of concerns of the sort that would cause me not to support the treaty. What I said on Monday was that these are things that Gibraltar would not like. But that like was not the proper test for this treaty. And that despite all these things that Gibraltar would not like, notwithstanding that, I support the treaty, and that remains my position, and nothing that I say on this programme tonight changes it. However, I believe that boots on the ground does not depend, and here I disagree with the Chief Minister, and I hope I can admonish him or disagree with him as gently as he does when he still admonishes me sometimes publicly. I think most people in Gibraltar, for most people in Gibraltar, boots on the ground does not depend on whether they're in uniform and does not depend on whether they are armed. Obviously, if they're in uniform and they are armed, it is worse to the point perhaps of unacceptability. But I think when most people in Gibraltar refer to boots on the ground, they, at least I do, speaking for myself, I'm talking about Spanish officials, albeit on behalf of the EU and not on behalf of the Spanish state in its own national right, in Gibraltar performing functions in relation to this treaty. Now, by that definition of boots on the ground, there are boots on the ground, and there is plenty of opportunity for boots on the ground in the airport, outside the airport, and in the airport outside of the Schengen shack. Of that, let nobody be in any doubt. If the definition is, however, of boots on the ground, uniform, and by the way, non-uniform doesn't mean in a suit. It means with a chaleco that says what is civil across the back and God knows what else.
Identifiable.
Suitably identifiable, the treaty says. Now, if boots on for those people, like the government apparently, for whom boots on, and many others of your viewers perhaps, for whom boots on the ground means uniform and armed, then there are no boots on the ground by that definition in the terminal outside of the Schengen shack. There might be outside of the air terminal in the context of hot pursuit and the context of surveillance and all of that, as was explained in Parliament yesterday, but not in the terminal. Now, I think it's a sterile debate. Frankly, I think it's more a question of clarity and transparency and making sure that people in Gibraltar understand. And I don't mind sitting here trying to sell, as I am, trying to assist the government to sell this to public opinion in Gibraltar, but it should be done on the basis that people know, and then we defend what we believe in.
And do you feel that it was necessary? Because people have been confused. People have been hearing boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. And
yes, but what no one has been explaining to them is that the person who was saying boots on the ground doesn't think it turns on uniforms and guns, and the person who was saying no boots on the ground was, without explaining it, meaning that boots on the ground is not boots on the ground unless you're armed or in uniform.
But I think
it's a silly debate, frankly.
There's also an element of it of not alarming the public as well. I think if you say there's going to be boots on the ground and uniformed police and everything, it might be a bit alarming.
The phrase has become sort of common, not common in Gibraltar, boots on the ground, but it does have this interpretation of sort of war, of...
Look, it's unfortunate. Ross, I don't share the point that you've just made. It's true that public opinion should not be alarmed unnecessarily. And I'm telling public opinion that, in my opinion, they should not be alarmed by anything in this treaty, provided we get and I say that with more confidence and more loudly, if we get the concordat in terms that we want. But that is not to say that people should not understand what it is that has been agreed, and what it is that Spanish officials are going to be able to see, because it may only be a matter of months before we are seeing it in action. When we arrive at the air terminal and we go to these e-gates, and there are no Spaniards at the e-gate because the Spaniards are in the Schengen shack, which is a few meters away. But they have the right, in certain circumstances, to come out of the Schengen shacks to the e-gate to supervise the e-gates. When I fly from London, I want your viewers fly, they may see a Guardia Civil with a chaleco, no arms, if the Chief Minister is right, but a chaleco suitably identified, at the e-gates. That is when they will be alarmed. And people are not going to be scared by that. People who, like me, have formed the view that whatever there is in this list that we don't like, this still remains a good deal for Gibraltar, given the alternatives. We're not going to be, I'm not going to be, I support this deal knowing that one day I could arrive at the terminal and find a Guardia Civil with a chaleco saying Guardia Civil, and no arms. The Chief Minister is right. I'm sure he is on this. He is right on this. No arms in the air terminal outside the shack. It's what I knew might happen.
Do you think it erodes trust when we have these sort of confusions?
Well, it's a matter of personal and political style. There are people who believe that when you're explaining very complicated issues, you keep it all at a very high level, and you give people reassurances without being explicit in detail. But my style is different, and is still different. My style is, I prefer to tell it warts and all, and then defend the warts and persuade people that the warts are not contagious and they're not bad.
Right, so Peter...
And it's just a difference of style.
So Peter, Christine, we are going to hear from the Leader of the Opposition now, and you said that there was nothing in the treaty to alarm you. I think the Opposition Leader, Keith Azopardi, has a different view on that, and there were several points that I don't think he was assured by in the Chief Minister's response. So I spoke to Keith Azopardi earlier on today, and I asked him what he thought about the Chief Minister's response. Mr Azopardi, the Chief Minister said in Parliament that he hoped that his reply to everyone's speech would allay concerns so that they didn't have to hold their noses when voting. Did you have to hold your nose when you voted yesterday's motion?
Look, nothing that the Chief Minister said in reply really gave us that huge assuaging of concerns. That's the reality. Our concerns remain for the reasons I indicated. Look, he tried to allay our concerns on things like boots on the ground, right? But nothing that he said really deals with the points that we raised. So in ultimate form, where does that leave us? It leaves us in exactly the same position that we reached. In other words, that when we made that evaluation of the treaty, we got to the point where we have legitimate concerns about the treaty, but of course, faced with the abyss of no deal, faced with the Chief Minister saying the day before there are going to be catastrophic circumstances, that they've got information that they haven't shared with us, well, then we took a leap of faith towards this agreement, as long as our conditions were met, which was that the amendments to the motion were made so that we, Gibraltar, have the trigger in the future on things that are going to be done under the agreement.
You said that you weren't arrogant to say that you could have negotiated a better deal. Okay.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that we would negotiate a better deal. What I said was that it was arrogant to say the reverse, that we would not together have been able to negotiate a better deal. For the government to take the view, as it has for many years, that to run an exclusionary process of negotiation where it doesn't involve the opposition, that is an arrogant position to say that we can negotiate a better deal on our own. So what I said was, we will never know that had we brought all the minds in the parliament together, we would not have got a better deal.
I stand corrected, but you said it wasn't the deal that you wanted, okay? So what was the deal you wanted?
Well, we wanted a deal that secures freedom of movement, that did not have boots on the ground, that doesn't have the intrusive controls of information that they are giving to Spain, and does and has certainty. If you explore all those points, what is interesting is that, first of all, the government confirmed yesterday that they were not seeking a deal of freedom of movement. They were only seeking a deal on mobility. That on boots on the ground, we were given assurances right up to the last 9 months that they would never do a deal that has boots on the ground. There are boots on the ground. We've got to be realistic and honest with the people of Gibraltar.
But do you accept that Britain isn't a member of the EU, not a member of Schengen? You made a comparison to Liechtenstein. How can Gibraltar have freedom of movement when we're not part of Schengen?
Because I said in my speech that under the Schengen Code, there is a provision that says that if you have an international agreement with the EU, which this is, then you can negotiate the right of freedom of movement. Liechtenstein has an agreement of freedom of movement because it has an international agreement with the EU. So if you take the opportunity of negotiating an international agreement via the UK with the EU, you fall within the article in that Schengen Borders Code that envisages that the ability to negotiate that right of freedom of movement. In fact, what happened was that the government have set out, as they confirmed yesterday, that they did not seek the right of freedom of movement. I think that's a mistake because we had the right of freedom of movement when we were in the EU for as long as we were there. So why not? It would have given us the right to reside. It would not have made us subject to the 90-day rule. It would have given us the right to work in the EU. So our citizens, I think, would have had a more expansive set of rights. So I think that was a mistake. And so that's the view that we took on that specific issue.
OK, you've said that this week that the government hasn't been honest about boots on the ground. But do you accept that the starting position 5 years ago is never going to be the final position after 5 years of negotiating?
Look, my complaint with the government is that they're just not honest with the people of Gibraltar.
Particularly, sorry, I wanted to add, as Sir Peter Caruana said, that Gibraltar was negotiating from a position of weakness.
Yes, and Sir Peter Caruana, in his analysis, says there's boots on the ground. But the government insists on saying there isn't boots on the ground, when in reality, what you've got is, their objection on boots on the ground, by the way, was, and I traced it in my speech in Parliament because I wanted to be very accurate in what I said, and I quoted them verbatim, systematically. So Joe Bossano and indeed the Chief Minister, when they objected to Spanish checks in Gibraltar, to Spanish presence in Gibraltar, what you've got, they didn't object to a Spanish officer wearing a uniform in a particular location. They were very precise about objecting to Spanish presence. And what you've got in this agreement is that there will be Spanish officers in Gibraltar at the airport undertaking checks. Yes, will they be within the so-called Schengen shack? Yes, but they will also be outside it doing certain duties. They will be transiting passengers from the port to the airport. There will also be other Spanish officers under the agreement that have the right to come in to do surveillance or hot pursuit. All of that is boots on the ground. There's no point denying it. We've got to be realistic and honest with the people of Gibraltar. That's my plea. And what you don't do, in my view, is tell the people of Gibraltar for 2 or 3 years there will not be boots on the ground. Then they U-turn and not properly explain it. And when this agreement, for context, was published 7 days ago, we rush into a debate and then the government deny that there are boots on the ground. The reality is that people need to be told the truth. And that is the truth.
You spoke in depth in your speech about boots on the ground, whether or not the Spanish police are able to discharge their service weapons in Gibraltar. You talked about, are we going to see flashing cars coming into Gibraltar and all of that. We haven't seen the draft administrative agreement. So when you talk about things like that, can I ask you, have you seen that?
Yes, I have. And let me take a step back, because I think it's important for context. The distinction here is there are things that stem from the Schengen acquis and the Schengen Borders Code, and then where there is police cooperation, and then there are things that are bespoke. What is bespoke in this agreement? What is bespoke is that there are Spanish officers doing checks, the Schengen checks within the airport and the port. That is bespoke. But when you look at the police cooperation provisions, which stem from the Schengen acquis and the Schengen Borders Code, which is this thing about surveillance or joint operations or indeed hot pursuits, you will look at, and this is what I traced in my speech, you'll see in Articles 40 and 41 of the Schengen acquis that there is very specific things and powers that stem from that. And the point I was trying to make is it's very clear that they can carry their weapons in hot pursuit under the code. In surveillance, they can carry their weapons unless restricted by the recipient state. And the point that I was making was two things. First of all, the emotional one, that having told the people of Gibraltar that there would not be boots on the ground, it is difficult to overcome that emotion of it being comfortable for any Gibraltarian to see any Spanish officer in Gibraltar exercising any function. But beyond that, when you look at the technical issues, I believe, having seen the administrative arrangements, that there are technical things that they are not restricting Spanish officers from doing when they've got the ability to do so under the Schengen acquis. For example, the carrying of weapons when they are doing surveillance.
Chief Minister said yesterday in his speech, actually what the treaty is doing, or the administrative arrangement is doing, is regulating operations and practices that exist today that you just don't know about, perhaps?
Well, I mean, I thought that was quite surprising, that we have, in effect, unregulated operations. I'm not sure what he was suggesting, whether these were regulated with the consent of the RGP. I mean, if it's to that extent only, well, then that's perhaps another matter, but those questions are best directed to the Commission of Police. But if he was suggesting that in some unregulated form things are happening, well, then, of course, that is completely unacceptable, that there should be unregulated operations without the RGP being aware of them. And of course, you can take a cold view about this. And a positive view, because you can say, look, as a matter of our consent...
RGP not being aware, or the public not being aware?
Well, I think...
I don't think he specifically said the RGP weren't being aware.
I'm not sure precisely what he meant by that. So that's the point that I'm making. But look, you can take a cold view of this and say, as a matter of our consent and our sovereignty, we are setting up an agreement, we're entering into this agreement whereby we are authorizing these things happening. And this is also a positive thing, because Spain, for the first time, is agreeing to receive powers by virtue of our consent and our exercise of our own sovereignty. So you can see this in a positive way. But if it's going to be done properly, first of all, be realistic and honest with people, which is what I think the government are not doing. And be honest that there has been, in effect, a U-turn on certain things. Secondly, let's regulate it in a proper way. And what I was inviting the government to do, when you look at the technicalities of the code, is to tighten those administrative arrangements, because I think they can be tightened on territorial limit. I think they can be tightened on outer limit of how long the surveillance can happen for. I think it can be tightened in terms of also the carriage of weapons. And I think these are important things that need to be considered.
The other issue is the Concordat, which we now understand is going to be signed. Are you reassured by that? I know you spoke about this yesterday, about whether it's not legally binding because it's a political agreement, but take us through the steps of what needs to happen to ensure that this is legally binding.
Well, again, taking a step back, if I may. I mean, when I first saw this agreement only 23 days ago now, it became obvious to me that there is going to be, this is not a sort of agreement that's set in stone, these are the decisions and it's over. There is a whole raft of forward-looking, forward-happening events, reviews, evaluations, further decisions that can be weaved in through the specialized committees or indeed the Cooperation Council. It became very obvious to me that it was important for the Gibraltar side to have a handle on the UK decision-making, because otherwise decisions will be made over our head in a way that I said in my speech creates a raft of, in effect, joint sovereignty, and that would be unacceptable to us. So we need to make sure that Gibraltar is in control of the decision-making through the specialized committees and the Cooperation Council. So from day one, I was asking the Chief Minister to provide me with a copy of the Concordat, because you will recall, viewers will know, that at the time of the withdrawal agreement, a concordat was entered into. In other words, an agreement between the UK and Gibraltar to regulate the exercise of UK power under the arrangements. So I was asking for that. On Sunday afternoon, for the first time, I received a draft of it, but it was obvious it was a draft. That led us to proposing those amendments to the motion to condition the ratification vote, to condition the ratification to the signing of a concordat, so that Gibraltar has the levers, has the eject button under the agreement.
Are you surprised that concordat has come about so late in the day? Would you have expected it to have been signed sooner?
Yes, I am surprised. Although I take at face value the things that the Chief Minister said, that eyes are on the elsewhere because of the international crisis and so on. I get that. But I would have thought, I have to say, I would have thought that given that this agreement has been ongoing for years, given that there was a political declaration last June 2025 that the negotiations were over politically, and that the legal negotiations ended on the 12th of December 2025, I would have thought that someone would have turned to the drafting of the Concordat, because those negotiating would have known that it was obvious, as it was to me within days of reading the draft agreement, that it was important to have the Gibraltar levers on the UK decision-making powers.
Mr. Azopardi, I'm going to pick you up on one thing that you said about the Chief Minister having said in the past, and the GSLP having said in the past, there'll be no boots on the ground, but now you say that there are boots on the ground. Well, the GSD said initially that it would call for a referendum on this treaty, and you've moved away from that position.
No, it's not that we've moved away from it, but it's because we're not in government and we didn't negotiate it.
But you could still call for it.
Well, our commitment was, I mean, let's look at the context on the decision on that. But our commitment was, if we had been elected in 2023, we would have negotiated a safe and beneficial agreement. We would have put that to a referendum. That was our commitment to people. We weren't elected to government. We're not going to start seeking to compel the government that didn't have that commitment to, or condition the motion that would have been politically disingenuous, I have to say, to try to do that on this moment. We did have that commitment in 2023. Our point now is different. Our point was, we've got to evaluate what this is and compare it to no deal. We don't have information about what no deal means, although instinctively we have a sense that it wouldn't be good for Gibraltar. We don't have economic analysis that the government has had about the value or otherwise of this agreement. So we're being asked to take a blind vote almost on things that we think we have misgivings on, where there has been U-turns on boots on the ground, but we're being asked to do this in short order. We're given the treaty 22 days ago, but asked not to speak about it publicly until it's published. It's published last Thursday. We then have a meeting with our executive 72 hours later, on the basis that we're going to be asked to vote 2 days later. The people of Gibraltar had 5 or 6 days to consider this before the vote. Based on that, our own evaluation and our own misgivings, yes, it was an agonizing decision. But if we had to take a leap of faith, we take a leap of faith towards the agreement despite our misgivings, where we have many, because that is the reality of what we face today. I said on radio that the government took us to the cliff edge, publishes the agreement, and then asks for an immediate vote. It wasn't a very fair process.
I'm going to ask you a hypothetical question. If we didn't have the pressure of the 10th of April implementation date because of the EES system coming into force, would you have taken a different position in Parliament this week?
Well, I think the problem is not the 10th of April necessarily. The problem is that, of course, this is not negotiable anymore. You know, it's presented as it's presented as the political declaration. The political process ended in June. The legal agreement has negotiation closed. This is now published as this is the EU-UK deal. This is not open for negotiation. So it's not. I mean, we can evaluate it. We can say I don't like the intrusive economic controls because I think that there is a possibility of abuse by Spain, and you know. Traditionally, we don't trust Spain. So can they use those economic levers to harm Gibraltar? We're worried about that. Are we emotionally, do we find it difficult to consider Spanish officers here in Gibraltar? Yes, we do. But, you know, faced with those choices on a non-negotiable basis and faced with no deal, we take a leap of faith towards this deal. And I made very clear yesterday, and this is quite important, I think, for viewers, that a future GSD government would make the best of a deal that we have misgivings on. In other words, we would implement it in government and make the best of this deal. And I wanted to make that clear in my speech, not just because of the misgivings that we were expressing, but so that people know what our attitude would be if we were elected to government.
Is there anything you might seek to change? And I asked you that question because when Labour came in, it said on its agenda was to reset its relationship, Britain's relationship with the EU. Is there anything that you would immediately come to mind that you would change should the GSD win the next election?
Well, I think there's a number of points that I'd make. First of all, let's make it work, because I think there are concerns, even on this framework, about how this is going to work. So let's make it work. I mean, you speak to the business community and they are concerned about the lack of information, their frustration, their anger on certain things because they've not been properly consulted. I am sure, like everything in life, that as soon as you start implementing this agreement, things will emerge that you want to tweak and improve or vary. So those things are, the first step is to make it work. Then beyond that, of course, there's going to be an evaluative process after 4 years. There's a clause that talks about a 4-year review and ongoing reviews. In the context of those reviews, I'm sure things will be considered by all sides of this agreement about what they would like to change. That's a matter for the future. But I think step one is to try to make it work in the manner it has been tried to be conceived, and then take it from there. But what I do think is that, look, I have concerns about it. We've spoken about boots on the ground a bit, but I have concerns about the economics, because we don't know how this is going to work. This is a recalibration of the economic model in relation to goods, things that we've never done before. We've never really had free trade in this way with Spain and in the hinterland. We're giving them economic controls about real-time access to computer information in certain areas. Spain have, for Schengen, they've got powers to decide things like short-stay visas or residence permits. Is that going to be exercised in a manner that is abusive and harmful to our economy? Because, for example, they don't want a trade delegation to come from a visa-requiring non-EU state. I don't know. These are things to be tried and tested in the future. I'm concerned. I'm concerned about the lack of certainty because of the 12-month break clause. But, we take a leap of faith. We're going to try to make it work from the opposition. I've said yesterday that we are willing to work together, collaboratively, in cooperation with the government on these issues, and in future, in government as well.
And has the government signalled to you that it is willing to work with the GSD on this?
Well, no, it hasn't. But look, this, the government brings us in to the extent that bringing in means anything, by showing us a copy of the draft treaty 22 days ago. That's not proper. Look, the government has a chance. It hasn't brought us in at all. In my view, they're in government for now. It's up to them if they want to involve us more in the implementation process. But what I can tell you is that I think this is an important enough issue for us to work at least a bit better on certain aspects to improve the lot of our community and the future for Gibraltar. And certainly in government, I would handle these things in a very different way.
And in terms, finally, of the huge administrative burden that is coming our way now, the role of the opposition, I mean, are you up to scrutinising and holding government to account, because there's going to be a vast amount of changes coming up and some of the issues that you mentioned yourself?
Well, we're certainly up to the job. I think we're showing it in dealing with this. I mean, at the end of the day, they've had 5 or 6 years or whatever to consider these issues, and we have spotted flaws within 21 days. So I think we're up to the job. I think it would be easier to get to have more scrutiny if we were given more information. So we're lacking in the economic analysis. But I do agree with you in the point that you make that this is not just about the agreement as it stands today. It's also about the future, about how this agreement is changed and how the different decisions are taken in the future. And that brings also a huge implementation, administrative and resources burden for Gibraltar. It's very clear, not just in security, but in terms of actually managing the implementation process. And that is going to be center stage as we go forward.
Mr. Azopardi, let's end this interview on a positive note. What are the benefits that you see from this treaty?
I mean, we've spoken a lot about the challenges, but I accept, and I did, I think, in my speech on Tuesday, I gave, I thought, a measured view of what the benefits versus the challenges are. And there are benefits in this agreement. Look, we're going to have mobility across Europe, subject to the 90-day rule, but of course, the fact that we have borderless travel, that we're going to be exempt from the EES, the fact that we can travel throughout Europe, that is a big plus for the people of Gibraltar. I think that is very important. Of course, it goes together with the new economic model, because you can't achieve personal mobility at the border if there's going to be a customs checkpoint. You remove the police, but not the customs, and therefore they had to do this economic model. And that brings also pressures for some businesses, because there's going to be winners and losers, but it also brings opportunities in the economy, because, you know, for the tourism industry, for example, side by side with a big investment program on the tourism product of Gibraltar, it allows the entry of tourists to Gibraltar. So I think it also brings good economic opportunities as long as we manage the challenges that lie ahead.
That was Opposition Leader Keith Azopardi speaking to me earlier on today. Plenty of reaction here still to come on that interview. Plus, we'll also be hearing from the Police Commissioner, Owain in part 2. Stay with us. And welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm joined by the former Chief Minister, Sir Peter Caruana, and news editor Christine Vasquez, both of whom are analysing this week's historic events. The motion for the treaty has been passed, kick-starting the process of ratification in the UK. We've just heard from the opposition leader, Keith Azopardi. Sir Peter, you were scribbling away furiously on your pad. Can I have some reaction to some of the points that he raised?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say, I think Keith Azopardi has had 2 very good days politically. I think he had a great parliament.
Only 2?
Well, I'm talking about the 2 days. I think he had a great parliamentary debate yesterday. I thought his speech was very well researched, very well constructed, and politically effective. And I think that interview that he's just given you now, I think is fair, correct, and what an opposition leader should be telling the people of Gibraltar. And I would like to say, having said that some of the things that he has said I don't agree with him. For example, I think he's absolutely right to call the government out on the boots on the ground. We've covered that ground already. I think the government ought not to have hidden behind this unexplained distinction of uniforms and guns, otherwise it's not boot on the ground. I think most people would recognise that boots on the ground does not depend on uniforms and grounds, and I think it would have been much better for the government to adopt the other approach, which is to say boots on the ground here, no uniforms here, no guns here, but the possibility of uniforms and the possibility of grounds there, and explain why that's okay, as I believe it's okay, and I'm trying to explain to people that it's okay. I think that Keith, perhaps if I was the leader of the opposition, I would do the same, but it's politics. This business of U-turns is the language of politics. You said you weren't going to do this, and you did. Well, so what? We're evaluating the reality of what we've got on the table, not whether they said they would. And in fairness to the government, you've got to stake out publicly a position as if you mean to defend it. But in a negotiation, otherwise nobody takes you seriously around the negotiating table. So of course it was right for the government to say, I won't have any Spanish officials in Gibraltar, because if you start by saying I will have Spanish officials in Gibraltar publicly, then the other side will negotiate down from there, not up. So I have no doubt that the government said things and ended up doing different, but that is implicit in any international negotiation and in any international negotiating technique. Outside of the political arena, where I now am comfortably, I would not criticise the government. If I were leader of the opposition, I might be saying exactly the same things as Keith Azopardi is doing. His job is to politic against the government. My job here today is just to analyse what's on the table and whether Gibraltar should be comfortable with it or not. So that was my intrinsic reaction to that. So in a way, both are right and both are wrong. I'm not so much concerned by the U-turns as I am about wanting to explain to the people what I understand to be the position in relation to boots on the ground, and on that I coincide with Keith.
We have plenty more questions for you, but first, Christine, I'd like to ask your reaction. Anything you want to point out?
Well, just following up from that one of the things that we discussed last week with the Chief Minister is that people are only seeing the treaty text as we're seeing it now. We haven't seen what position things started from. Exactly. So things like, and the example that I use, because I think it's perhaps the clearer one, is the joint patrols. And you can imagine that that's starting from a position of Spain saying, OK, it has to be Guardia Civil, in Guardia Civil boats, and they arrest, and you negotiate. That's what it's all about. And you come all the way here to, well, actually, we're sharing boats, it's joint patrols, Gibraltar arrests in their own waters. So we haven't seen the process. And I think there's a lot in between. One of the things that I did want to ask Sir Peter was that you said in your opinion in the Chronicle that you had no reason to doubt that the treaty is the best that Gibraltar could have negotiated from the position of weakness it was in, contrary to our wishes. What do you make of Mr. Azopardi's view that we'll never know this, and that the opposition could have had a say in negotiations? Do you think it could have changed anything? Would it
I do have a view on that. Look, I stick with what I said. I have no reason to believe that any of us could have done any better with the hand that Gibraltar had. I'd like to see a different government in Gibraltar. I want to see a GSD government elected into Gibraltar, but I do not doubt Fabian Picardo, Joseph Garcia and Michael Llamas's ability to negotiate the best agreement that is available. Now, that is not to say that Keith is not right when he says that the more brain power you bring to bear on an effort over a 5-year period, the more people that there are who might contribute an approach. I mean, when I went on for constitutional reform, I brought in not just the opposition, I brought in Peter Eastler and I brought in retired politicians who had experience. Why? Because everybody can contribute something, and you just never know who is going to plant the seed of an idea on the table that might grow into the oak tree that would have been different in this treaty. So he is right. We will never know. And it is possible that with more people, if not at the negotiating table, at least within the government's ring of confidence, advising, recommending, aware of what was happening, giving the government ideas to improve, for improved safety, of course that would have been a positive contribution if you had the right people, trustworthy people who are not going to embarrass the government by coming out publicly with any form of betrayal. It would have been a terrible disservice to Gibraltar if they had. And Keith Azopardi would never have done that. I would never have done that. I'm not suggesting that I should have been asked, but other people perhaps. So they're both right. Again, depending on how you spin it, they are both right and they are both wrong.
Yeah, I was going to ask you whether the government should have brought the GST in earlier, and you seem to have answered that question. Chief Minister said you can't negotiate or draft a letter by committee. That was his.
Right.
That was his.
But no one is suggesting. Look, what do they say? The camel is a committee, is a horse designed by a committee. A committee cannot draft.
Yeah.
But a committee can contribute to the thinking and the ideas that then get reflected in the draft. I wasn't impressed very much by that particular argument about.
What do you think are the risks going forward? What are the traps that we need to be aware of and be careful of?
There are two things that top my list of concerns here. But before I give them to you, I'm going to say something as an aside, which is that the real risk comes from making sure that Spain does not abuse this, doesn't overuse or use in inappropriate circumstances or in inappropriate manner the rights that she has been given on behalf of the EU in this treaty. So that's a second C thing. It's let's see how we go, let's see what the attitude, a different government in Spain, of course, might want to deploy a different attitude. I've even heard it suggested, people in Gibraltar come up with all manner of ideas that Spain could even contrive hot pursuits in order just to be seen driving one of her Guardia Civil Land Rovers into Gibraltar. We've got to assume that Spain is going to be a serious country, and this is going to operate within the. But we've got to be on our guard.
And you have rogue policemen.
And we've got to be exactly. So we've got to be on our guard. And there's, you can't draft that risk out of any agreement. As how irresponsibly or unreasonably the other side. There are two things, however. The two things that most concern me are the Concordat, that the Chief Minister has got to bring back a Concordat, because I think that this is not just about today or tomorrow. It's not about what we might like in this generation of Europe. We've got to create a Gibraltar that is politically and economically safe for our children and for our grandchildren and for people 35 or 40 years from now, in circumstances that we just cannot conceive now what they might be. Gibraltar must have its finger on the termination trigger, as well as on all the other triggers that I mentioned in my piece on Monday, and that the Chief Minister has taken the House through yesterday, which I have no doubt were in his Concordat aspirations anyway. I'm not claiming credit for putting these thoughts into anybody's mind. What I wanted to achieve yesterday was achieved, and that is that the House should not pass an unamended resolution so that we would not lose leverage over the UK in obtaining the Concordat. So let's assume that the Concordat comes. The next, actually, might surprise you. The other thing that concerns me about this, Keith Azopardi has mentioned it in passing, is the lack of certainty. This idea that we could spend years building an economy around an open, fluid frontier model, and that Spain is only ever 12 months away from pulling the rug out from it and leaving us with an economic model unsuited for the alternative model of frontier operation, is one that concerns me. I have to say, I think that there is too much precariousness of timing. I don't know whether that might have been improved in the negotiation. I assume not, because I suppose these thoughts must have crossed the minds of our negotiators as well. But I am concerned about the effect of Spain's ability to just undermine our economy by simply triggering the cancellation of this treaty. And the other aspect of that is lack of investor confidence. Who is going to Are we going to be able to persuade investors to invest in Gibraltar? Gaming companies to come and stay in Gibraltar on the basis of only a 12-month visibility of certainty? Actually, I am more concerned by these factors than I am by boots on the ground, chalecos, high visibility jackets, and hot pursuits, frankly.
Sorry, Sir Peter, the Chief Minister today said we'd crossed the Rubicon, and I think he meant it as a common use of the phrase of no turning back, and not that of sparking a civil war, as Julius Caesar did. But anyway, there's a lot of work for us to get to have got to where we are, but there's a lot of work starting now. And going by what you've just said, is it another area of concern that there are so many new commitments and obligations to comply with? And do you see this as a challenge? Because we could get it wrong. It's all totally new. And it is, termination does hinge on us perhaps getting it wrong.
No, termination hinges on us getting it intentionally wrong and refusing to correct it. There are mechanisms in the treaty.
So the Cooperation Council.
There are mechanisms, and the EU would not pull the plug. All countries sometimes have difficulties in complying with their treaty obligations in the EU. There is no precipice of you get this wrong once and you're out. No, there are procedures, there are opportunities to correct. Expulsion, or termination for cause, as lawyers call it, is when you persistently refuse to correct what is clearly an established non-compliant. I'm not so much worried about that. Look, I think one of the things that Gibraltar shines for, and for which we are globally admired, and rightly so, is this community of now 38. I'm still sort of
30.
I'm still a 30,000 man, a little bit of a dinosaur in these things. 30. I heard Joe Orsano say 38, and that's 38,000. 38,000 people. The capacity that this community has to deal with complex international treaties and compliances and rules and laws, and the people that it can bring to bear, and the professionals and the civil servants and the lawyers and all the skills that are required. I have no doubt whatsoever. It may cost us a bit of money, but I have no doubt whatsoever that this community has easily got the capacity, and it'll create very good jobs for a lot of our children, a lot of capacity. We've got all the capacity we need to administer our side of these obligations. Of that, I have no doubt.
Sir Peter, capacity is one thing, resources is another, isn't it? We're going to go to the Police Commissioner. You did mention economic prosperity, which is a huge impact of this treaty, hopefully, but we are fixated on security at the moment and boots on the ground and policing, because I think perhaps that's one of the most visible aspects of this treaty. I spoke to the Police Commissioner earlier on, and I put several questions to him. Police Commissioner, thank you very much for coming in and speaking to us. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go straight into it. What will the treaty mean to the RGP that's different to what we have today?
Well, the treaty, Part 2, Chapter 3, defines police cooperation and sets out in law the expectations on competent authorities, the law enforcement agencies, and it defines, information sharing, police cooperation, joint patrol mechanisms, and it actually firms up our cooperation with Spanish law enforcement. That's the context, and I think it's important to put that into context as we move towards implementation.
We'll go into that in more detail in a moment, but I want to ask whether the RGP is ready to meet the challenges of this treaty and the demands of it, because it's been very well documented. There's been a lot of RGP officers that have left in recent years. They've lost a lot of experience. A lot of young recruits have come in, no experience there, very little experience. Is the RGP ready for that? And what do you intend to do in terms of resources?
So, absolutely. I've been having meetings with the Chief Minister, with the Chief Secretary, with the Attorney General, with the Gibraltar Police Authority for many months now. The RGP is embedded in the government's treaty working group that meets weekly. I've appointed a senior officer to lead on the implementation in terms of the RGP, and we are absolutely determined to meet the requirements and the expectations of the treaty insofar as police cooperation is concerned. It is going to be a challenge in the context of our current resource envelope. We do have an ambitious funding bid with the government in terms of an uplift. We do have the recruitment that is ongoing, and we're going to have to provide an enhanced police presence at the airport, at the land frontier, and at sea to provide enhanced security. And I think, this will provide hopefully a deterrent effect to anybody who seeks to seek harm to Gibraltar in the context of a free-flowing border. And, we've been scenario testing. We've been, agile enough to respond to different threats to policing over many decades, more online harms, counter-terrorism, and we're absolutely ready to implement this from a policing perspective.
OK, uplift of how many?
Well, the Chief Minister, as a matter of public record, spoke about a bid that I have made to the government for 20 constables. We also have a civilinisation programme ongoing. But it's going to take a few months, obviously, to have the pipeline through for those officers to be deployed. So it is going to be a challenge within the existing envelope. I'm determined to maintain community policing, maintain policing in our main street, in our leisure areas. But we're going to have to look at, reducing some policing services because we only have so many officers, so many hours to provide a 24/7 service at the border.
Yeah, I was going to say implementation date we're expecting to be the 10th of April. So will you be taking away from other areas to ensure that you've got your complement at the airport and at the border?
So we are reviewing our organisation.
And at sea.
We're reviewing our organisation design. We're already running on a lean model. And, there's different ways in which we can be smarter about how we deploy our officers. We can make efficiencies, conversations with other agencies about perhaps some of the other demands that policing pick up. And I'm confident that whilst it's going to be a challenge, that we will be able to safeguard and actually enhance Gibraltar's national security in the context of a framework that, police cooperation, information exchange. We're going to be the first overseas territory to plug into the United Kingdom's Police National Database. That will be going live in April, so we'll be able to have, enhanced background checks on British nationals coming into Gibraltar, and we're going to have enhanced cooperation with our Spanish counterparts, who we have enjoyed and do enjoy a very good working relationship at both a senior level on the Policia Nacional and the Guardia Civil, and at an operational level. What the treaty does is formalises that and strengthens that in terms of information exchange.
OK, you say you've got a bid into the government. Have you been given any commitments? We know any firm commitments. When are you going to get a response to that bid?
Well, it's part of the government's public sector budget setting for the next financial year. Those conversations are ongoing. The Chief Minister has indicated support for our civilinisation programme, which will free up some officers for the front line. You may have seen that we have a crime scene investigator currently open. We are recruiting at the moment as well for any Gibraltarians who consider a policing career. And, those conversations are ongoing.
Can you give us the latest on New Mole House? What's happening there? We know it's been cleared, it's safe, but are we looking at when are you looking at relocating?
Well, again, that depends on, collaboration with the government on identifying suitable land. It involves, significant investment in a new police headquarters. I've been very clear that we have outgrown New Mole House. It's not fit for purpose. I've got policing services across 7 different areas in Gibraltar. And, for our officers' well-being and, motivation and productivity, it's important that we identify a modern police HQ in order that we can deliver the public service. OK. Commissioner, I'm going to ask you a question about collaboration with your Spanish counterparts, because with the greatest respect, you're not fluent in Spanish, and I know that previous police commissioners have built that relationship with their counterparts through dialogue and building up a rapport. How are you managing to do that with a language deficit? So I mentioned earlier that I do have a senior officer, a superintendent, who's engaged on treaty implementation alongside me, who has the Spanish language. I have met with my counterparts on the other side on many occasions, both informally over coffee, but also more formally in awards ceremonies, and members of their establishments have attended my award ceremonies as well on a reciprocal basis. So, you know, whilst the language is a barrier, the mutual respect, the cooperation, you know, let's not forget that this is about disrupting serious organised crime. This is about closer collaboration to prevent and detect, and anything that, you know, formalises that should make society safer.
OK, well, let's have a look at policing under the treaty. You've spoken about a greater police presence at the frontier and at the airport. What about in our streets? Will we be seeing a more police presence in our streets?
So I'm committed to have more visible policing presence. The feedback I'm getting from retailers, from, you know, commercial premises, from residents in our estates is that they are seeing more police officers on the beat. I don't want to lose that. I want to maintain that. It is going to be a challenge in the context of the additional resources we're providing at the land frontier and at sea. However, you know, we are working with these partners, communities, businesses to look at ways in which we can collaborate. You know, this is about a partnership approach to crime prevention, and it's about being smart in our deployment. So having police officers in the perhaps higher crime areas for specific periods to prevent and detect, rather than having officers perhaps doing ad hoc patrols when they're not needed.
OK, I want to ask you whether any kind of risk assessment has been carried out as to what you might expect with an open land frontier.
Yeah, so we are alive to risks of criminals who seek to exploit perhaps what will be, you know, psychologically no checks. You know, the infrastructure will remain, but there won't be any form of checks. So, you know, we're alive to the threat perhaps of acquisitive crime, people who seek to exploit our, you know, commercial and leisure areas. Perhaps more organised criminality. There are some unknown risks here as well.
Can we expect more? Can we expect more of these types of crimes with an open frontier?
Well, with additional significant uniformed presence at the border, the Royal Gibraltar Police, as the most senior law enforcement agency in Gibraltar, having a presence there, alongside the Borders and Coastal Agency and the Customs, His Majesty's Customs Authority, as well as, you know, CCTV, automatic number plate recognition. That should be a deterrent effect. It should also enhance our ability to detect and apprehend if something does happen. Look, there are unknown risks. You know, we do live in a often volatile, uncertain world. We are alive to those risks. We've evolved over time in dealing with different threats, and it's about being agile and ready to respond if something happens.
OK, let's talk about those areas that there's been a lot of debate about in Parliament, in interviews and, you know, in the wider public. The issue of uninterrupted pursuit, hot pursuit is what we call it. And then I want to talk about joint patrols at sea and surveillance, joint surveillance as well. Let's talk about joint uninterrupted hot pursuit. The Schengen Acquis allows for this, as we know. Pursuit can continue across borders without prior authorisation in urgent cases, and officers may carry service weapons unless the host state prohibits it. So the question is, if there is a hot pursuit, that is, the Spanish police are engaged in hot pursuit, they're chasing a Spanish criminal or a criminal in Spain that's committed a crime over there, and they chase him into Gibraltar. Will those police officers be allowed to enter Gibraltar during that emergency hot pursuit with their service weapons and in uniform?
So in terms of the treaty, let's be really clear on the language around hot pursuits. First of all, it's may pursue. Second of all, in specific circumstances. So Annex 8 defines specific serious offences that would have to qualify for that pursuit or that surveillance. So we're talking here about terrorists, you know, serious violent assaults and rapists, so the specific circumstances. Secondly, the question about armed police. You know, the Spanish law enforcement are routinely armed. We, following the British model of policing by consent, are not routinely armed. However, we do have an armed capability. I do have firearms officers that patrol Gibraltar on a 24/7 basis, and we're looking to enhance that in the context of the border. The question on whether they can carry their service weapons is something that will be discussed once the formal working groups have been set up with the Spanish law enforcement, and the administrative arrangements around how these are going to work in practice are worked through. And those working groups are going to sit in the next week or so, and then we'll be able to have those conversations with our Spanish counterparts.
Okay, and when I said Spanish police coming into Gibraltar with weapons and uniform, I also mean flashing cars as well, because that was an issue that the opposition leader brought up in Parliament. Are we going to see flashing cars, Spanish police flashing cars? Now, you've mentioned this bilateral administrative arrangement. How far are you into deciding these things? Because obviously Spanish police have different terms of engagement to RGP officers, so they would want to be protected once they're here as well. So do you foresee that it's going to be something that's complicated? I mean, we only have until the 10th of April to work this out.
It is complex, okay? There are many issues around terms, around conditions, around liabilities, around actually our ethos as well, our look, our feel, and our mission, and our training. But let's reflect for a moment that the Royal Gibraltar Police have supported joint investigations and operations in Spain, and Spanish law enforcement have supported executive action in Gibraltar over the years to disrupt serious organised criminality. What the treaty provides now is a clear legal framework with safeguards to formalise that and to modernise that.
The question was, though, will it be done on time?
I'm confident the conversations are happening. The working groups are being set up, and we're going to have to work through in terms of our, terms of reference, our training on that. But it's complicated.
Would I be able to ask your own view? Do you think Spanish police should be allowed to come into Gibraltar with their service weapons?
I'm here to talk about the policing aspect of the treaty. I'm not here to give an opinion. This is a political agreement, a draft agreement ratified by the Gibraltar government. I'm here to talk about the operational. Yeah,
but don't you have input into what's finally decided? You're part of that conversation, aren't you?
Absolutely. So, and also let's make this point very clear, that it is only the Royal Gibraltar Police that can arrest and detain a person being pursued in the circumstances you've outlined, being arrested and taken to Newmall House, and then relying on the information being provided by Spanish law enforcement for them to be extradited to Spain, as the arrangements that we had pre-Brexit around European arrest warrants. And this is reciprocal as well, because if a person seeks to escape, and again, with the resources, with the infrastructure, I wouldn't say I'm confident, but I am optimistically confident that we'll be able to stop them from escaping. And likewise, I'm sure Spanish authorities don't want anybody running into Gibraltar and then being embroiled in the Gibraltar judicial system. So, these are...
Yeah, and in terms of how far they can venture into Gibraltar, that presumably will be subject to agreement when you sit down with a working group.
Absolutely, and there are safeguards around, not entering private premises and not being able to actually arrest in the host nation. And it is the sole preserve of the Royal Gibraltar Police in terms of that. And
in terms of joint patrols at sea, we know that the vessel will be a Schengen-flagged vessel, and there will be a Gibraltar and a Spanish officials on board the ship. But if it's in Gibraltar waters, would the Spanish official be able to take any kind of executive action?
No, this is about the host nation in the land and the sea where the incident occurs that has primacy. And the Schengen patrols are, again, Schengen patrols, focusing on, human trafficking and, immigration matters. The Royal Gibraltar Police's mission at sea is broader than that, around, pleasure craft theft, around, beach patrols, around, deaths at sea that occasionally happen on the bunkering. So, let's be clear that whilst it is complicated and the dual patrols in terms of our look and feel different, we're going to have to work through that, but they're slightly different missions.
Well, one of the things that is different is that when Spanish are patrolling in the waters and they go after, let's say, a drug boat they will attempt to immobilise a boat, whereas the RGP will tend to pace it. So are these details, terms of engagement that you're going to have to thrash out now?
We're going to have to absolutely be very clear on the rules of engagement and have our red lines and set the expectations. And, the treaty is clear as well about, mutual respect and, good faith on both sides. With the right leadership, with the right leadership setting the tone, then, this is about setting the expectation.
What if there's a dispute on that boat about what action should be taken? How is that resolved in the heat of the moment?
Well, look, when spontaneous things happen, whether it's at the airport, at the land frontier or at sea, it's a conversation. It's about, using the training, using the experience to be able to resolve a matter. These matters are happening now where we have, Spanish vessels perhaps pursuing ribs, suspected drug dealers or what have you. They end up in our waters. We decide where does the suspected rib go to, where's it housed, where's it, what's the investigation handback, who takes primacy on, evidence gathering, where do the suspects end up? So I cannot see it being hugely different to the challenges that we currently have.
Okay, and in terms of responsibility, we know that the authority in Gibraltar waters lies with the Gibraltarian authorities and vice versa in Spain. So if, let's say, an RGP is on a patrol vessel in Spain, there's an incident out at sea, does the RGP officer take equal responsibility to the Spanish officer, and that would be pursued through their judiciary system?
Yeah, so I think it's important that police cooperation means that we're, as a police officers, whether we're on duty or off duty, no matter what jurisdiction that we're in, we have a responsibility around, public protection and safeguard. Obviously, the context you've spoken about, they will have a professional obligation to support and provide their witness statements about what they've seen. But the primacy of the case that you've mentioned would be on the Spanish side via Spanish courts. Anything in Gibraltar is via Gibraltar police and Gibraltar courts.
And it's equal responsibility at the decisions that are taken on that vessel?
Equal responsibilities in terms of
the
expectations to respond and to deal, yes,
yeah.
Using training, using their techniques respectfully. But the primacy for an investigation and a prosecution would be in the jurisdiction where the offence takes place.
Okay. One final question on this. How regular are the patrols going to be? So
it's going to be 24/7 Schengen patrols on a 1 week on, 1 week off basis in terms of who leads the patrols, who pilots the vessel.
Okay, I meant sort of daily. Is it just a continuous thing, is it?
It's 24/7.
24/7, so it's continuous.
It's 24/7, and I'm going to have Royal Gibraltar police officers at sea, at the airport, and at the land frontier 24/7.
Okay, and in terms of the joint surveillance, just clarify that notice has to be given for joint surveillance. Again, is this subject to the administrative arrangements in terms of what actions the Spanish officer can take, whether they can take their service weapons with them? That's all subject to agreement still?
Absolutely, and again in specific circumstances for serious crime. So there are safeguards in there, but these are all matters that will be defined in the operational protocols agreed between myself on behalf of the Royal Gibraltar Police as the senior law enforcement agency and our Spanish counterparts.
Okay, well, we look forward to speaking to you further down the line to find out more about that. But I want to ask you finally one question. Will we expect to see crime levels change in Gibraltar?
So crime levels are always changing. Threat levels are always changing. I think it's important that we have a very clear message to the public that we are here to safeguard you, to protect you. We are alive to the threats and the risks, and we will respond to them. We will know on the 10th of April how that's going to manifest itself in terms of the fluid people. But, the investment in resources, the investment in, the physical architecture, the Royal Gibraltar Police have provided technical recommendations to the government of Gibraltar around what's needed to enhance physical security, things like hostile vehicle mitigation barriers. So, in my view, all of these steps are strengthening national security, not weakening them. Only time will tell, of course, how crime trends, evolve and change.
And that was the Police Commissioner, Owain Richards, speaking to me earlier on today. There's quite a lot of information in that interview, and I want to put, we promised to keep answers a bit short because there's still quite a lot of questions coming in. A couple of things I want to ask about. First of all, it doesn't seem as though the RGP are going to be resourced in time for the 10th of April implementation date. They have got recruitment in the pipeline, but it doesn't look as though that takes time, and that may not necessarily be ready. But the other thing he said, I want to ask you about, is that in terms of the administrative arrangements, he said that conversations were happening and working groups were being set up. With the implementation date just a few weeks away, does that seem a bit late in the day? Should these conversations not have already happened? Should there not have been more certainty by now?
Probably yes. I think what's happened is that the need to get this done by April, because to try and avoid the hard border, even temporarily, has just meant that what might have been done in slower order is now having to be done in a much more accelerated basis. Absolutely. It is not optimal to be to be here where we are at the beginning of March with a commencement date in April, and the Commissioner of Police saying that he's not yet ready. I'm not surprised.
And that conversations are being had.
Because of that. The government is committed. The Chief Minister has sold this as not being a security fair to the people of Gibraltar on the basis of more resources for the RGP, and he's got to deliver more resources. I'm not saying that he's got to deliver whatever the RGP wants, but he's got to be advised by the professionals, which are the RGP and Commissioner Richards, about what resources he needs to deliver the level of coverage and security and reactionability and presence that they need for that. And as a community, we've got to be willing to pay for it. So there will be challenges for the RGP, particularly because of the speed in which it's got to be done. There are resources issues. The Gibraltar government has got to back the RGP up as required to deliver the level of comfort that the Chief Minister himself has said that we can expect. The government is committed to that. They've got to deliver. And I am confident that if the government does, the RGP is under professional leadership. There are great police officers in the senior management of the RGP. I don't attach a huge amount of importance to this language issue, whether he speaks Spanish or not. I have no doubt that if the government, as it has promised to do, properly resources the RGP will deliver to us. If, in the short term, because recruitment and training takes a bit of time, they are short of manpower, then I'm sure the Customs can help, the Borders Agency, the Borders and Coast Guard Agency, we've got personnel.
Do they have the same powers, though?
They can be given the powers. They can be given special comfortable power. We've got the MOD police that can be temporarily used to really... So if it has to be done on an all-hands-to-the-pump basis, then that should be done.
No pressure, no? I mean, isn't it a bit of a lot of responsibility to place on the RGP to deliver?
Well, it's a challenge. They are professional people. They're trained to react to challenges. I have no doubt that Owain Richards will rise up to the challenge and he will deliver, supported by his senior management, if we resource them properly. If we don't resource them properly, then don't expect them to deliver because they can't.
Sir Peter, the joint surveillance, I think a bit of confusion of what exactly that will entail.
This business of surveillance has got to be understood in the context in which it arises. There are provisions in the treaty for surveillance to be carried out in Gibraltar by Spanish officers in two different ways. None of them involves, by the way, neither of those ways is Spanish officers creeping into Gibraltar and keeping you or me under surveillance in Gibraltar. None of those. That is not permitted by the treaty. What is one of the two versions of permitted surveillance is what is called continued surveillance, which is the equivalent of hot pursuit. So hot pursuit, or uninterrupted pursuit as it's called in the treaty, is when the police are chasing somebody in La Linea and they duck into Gibraltar across the border line, and the Spanish police are able to continue a pursuit that started in Spain. They're not entitled to start a pursuit in Gibraltar. They can't drive into Gibraltar in order to pursue you or me down Line Wall Road. Mm-hmm. right? They have to have been chasing us
Yes.
from La Linea, and then they come. And the equivalent in surveillance is this. If they are keeping somebody under surveillance in Spain, and they're following cloak and dagger, ducking in and out of portones, and they're following somebody, keeping them under surveillance, and that person ducks into Gibraltar, they can continue to follow them into Gibraltar, to continue to keep them under surveillance. But that is a continued surveillance. Like the hot pursuit, the surveillance has to have started and been underway in Spain, and the person being surveyed has got to cross the border into Gibraltar. In those circumstances, the Spaniards can continue surveillance. The other form in which joint surveillance is envisaged is in joint operations with the RGP. So if the RGP and the Spanish police are working on a criminal case together, the Spanish police can be in Gibraltar, helping or co-surveying, surveilling, I'm not sure which right word is that, with the RGP in those circumstances. But neither of them is Spain coming into Gibraltar in order to survey keep anybody under surveillance by itself, and certainly there is no pursuing in Gibraltar unless the pursuit started.
I thought the Chief Minister had a very good point yesterday when he was talking about hot pursuit, and he actually gave the example of the other way around, because we don't think of it when it's reciprocal. And what he said was, just imagine that you were down Main Street and somebody stole your baby, and they could just run to Spain and take cover there. And
I thought that was a very good point. I have to say I hadn't thought of it when I heard him say it. I think
it's good when you hear the practicalities as opposed to the
Isn't
politics.
that the case now, though?
But it doesn't.
But it's the reciprocal. People just think you're going to get Spanish police in Gibraltar, but they don't think, well,
so
what happens if it happens to you?
The critics of that view, in which I don't include myself, the critics of that view would say, but look, we don't claim Spain's sovereignty, and our police have never treated the Spanish people badly in Gibraltar. So this is the human, this is the emotional aspect of this, that we are being asked to accept things that we don't like. Why don't we like them? When the French don't mind it if the Italians do it, and the Dutch don't mind it. The difference is that we carry psychological baggage, justifiably we carry psychological baggage, because of the way that Spain has treated us over so many decades. And that's the bottom. It is a human. I understand that the people of Gibraltar should feel uncomfortable about these things.
We are going to go to some questions now. We've had a few viewer questions, and then I know, Christine, you want to end with a big question, which we'll ask Sir Peter after we've done that. You're looking at me like, what's she talking about?
I am.
I'll prompt you in a moment. OK, so this one is from Wilfred. If our airport, Sir Peter, if our airport is going to be used jointly with Spain, inviting flights from different parts of Europe, why haven't they removed the air restrictions imposed by Franco, the Spanish military dictator? These makes landings very difficult or impossible with certain weather conditions. I think I need my glasses on. Very quickly, Sir Peter.
Well, just to clarify, like Cordova, my understanding of this is that it is not an agreement for the joint use of the airport. It's an agreement for the enhanced or expanded use of the airport. This doesn't make the Gibraltar airport a joint Spanish and Gibraltar airport or anything like that. I have other things to say about the airport, but not that. That is not what this airport is about. Now, should they remove, I suppose Wilfred means the restrictions on air flights not overflying the Spanish waters. Well, I have recently flown, I'm not sure how strictly they enforce that, frankly. I have been on plenty of flights recently where it seemed to me I was a good deal closer to Algeciras harbour than I was to Gibraltar harbour, but perhaps that's just my imagination playing tricks on me. I would expect, in the context of this treaty and the operations of it and the merit, for those sorts of restrictions, some of which are security-based, not just stubbornness on the Spanish part, would disappear. This idea that in the context of this, and to this extent, Wilfred is right in the spirit of his question, that any degree of danger or added difficulty to landing in Gibraltar could be placed by Spain simply choosing to refuse Gibraltar-bound aircraft to overfly the median line of the bay would be very difficult to accept, morally very difficult to accept, and morally very difficult for Spain to justify. And as confident as I can be that she won't.
Sorry, Rose, before we go to another question, but just because we are there, one of the things that the Chief Minister, the government's opinion differ from Sir Peter Caruana is on the joint venture management company at the airport, which it claims is an improvement on Cordova.
Well, let's be clear. Look, I'll say something about that because you're obviously provoking me into becoming a bit political. What I have said in my opinion and in my chronicle piece is that if the role of the joint venture company is what the government has explained to me that it is, simply to preside over the tender process and then to see that whoever wins the tender complies with their obligations and our obligations under this agreement insofar as it concerns the manager, the airport operator, I do not think, I'm not troubled by that. I don't think it's a sovereignty concession. I don't think it's a jury or another ghosts that haunt us. But the problem is that the treaty doesn't say that. The treaty says, there's 5 lines, and it simply says that not that they will preside over, it says that this joint venture company, of which we only own half, and Spain owns the other half, will select the winning tender, and then will supervise the compliance by the day-to-day management by the commercial company. That might mean what the government says. It doesn't say it, because that's a very general statement.
Is that better than Cordova?
Well, I'll come to answer your question in a moment. If the treaty means what the government says it means there, I am comfortable with it, and I trust the government that they're not telling me an untruth, and if that's the case, so be it. But if it means that this joint venture company is going to exercise the owner's rights to supervise the contractor generally, which the government, let me hasten to say, has told me is, and the Chief Minister, I think, has said in Parliament yesterday, is not the case.
It's for tenders.
But if it were the case, then I think that would be a retrograde step that would make Cordova look like the best deal Gibraltar has ever done. It was the best deal that Gibraltar could do at that time. I'm sure the Chief Minister will forgive me another minor admonition, delivered as politely as I can.
Peter, we have to speed you along, I'm afraid.
Speed me up. The suggestion that this agreement on the airport is a step back or an improvement on Cordova is, frankly, for the birds. Neither of them gave away any of the sovereignty, but I didn't say that the Gibraltar government was going to allow a company in Ireland subject to Irish laws with a 50% shareholder decide who should be the manager of the airport. I was going to decide as Chief Minister, or the government of the day was going to decide as Chief Minister, who was going to be. We were going to set the terms. We were going to preside over the tender process. We were going to exercise all the owner's rights. So the Chief Minister will forgive me for disagreeing with him. And anyway, he's got to defend his deal on its own merits, whether it's better or worse than Cordova. And I don't care what the answer to that is, frankly, is not relevant. The Chief Minister has got to defend this deal as I am defending his deal, on its merits, regardless. The fact that, look, if Cordova was bad, and I don't think it was, the fact that this is better than Cordova doesn't make it good or safe. It simply means it's less bad than Cordova. The references back to Cordova is an unhelpful, irrelevant, politicizing of a matter for camouflage purposes. And the Chief Minister didn't have to go there to defend this deal. He can defend it on its merits.
Can I stir it up a bit more? He actually said Cordova was a byproduct of Brussels, although I must say he did even it out by saying the treaty was a byproduct of Brexit.
I don't accept that either. Look, the trilateral process, Spain agreed to it at a meeting of Brussels, at which I was absent, but I had approved before the joint communique that was going to come out, and I insisted, and Spain accepted, the language about a separate process, separate from Brussels. What the trilateral process did was condemn bilateralism, condemn the Brussels process to the dustbins of history forever. Has anybody ever heard of the Brussels process since? Have there been any meetings of the Brussels process since? Or doesn't the Chief Minister understand that he has been able to normally, public opinion in Gibraltar accepting it, Spain accepting it, meetings galore with Spanish ministers in Madrid, in Brussels, in Timbuktu, doesn't he realize that he has only been able to do that because it became normal and acceptable, and I made it normal and acceptable for Gibraltar public opinion, and the Spanish government made it normal and acceptable for Spanish public opinion in the Trilateral Forum. And had it not been for the Trilateral Forum, he could not have played the role that he has played in this negotiating process. The GST government is not defending its legacy. Our legacy speaks for itself. New constitution, successful defense against the joint sovereignty, the double lock, and condemning bilateralism to the dustbins of history forever. Let's see what the GSLP legacy is, equivalent to any of those, let alone all four of them.
Sir Peter, we're going to have to end the programme on that note. Thank you very much. There have been quite a lot of viewer questions that have come in. Sir Peter, will you come back next week and answer all questions? Unfortunately, we've not been able to get through today.
Well, I understand you're going to explain what the programme is next week, or not yet?
We're going to keep it a secret for now.
You're going to keep it a secret for now. In a collective sense of fellow look-alike birds.
Yes, and also in the spirit of honesty, complete honesty. We'll have to wait until next week for further details. Thank you very much, Christine. Sir Peter, thank you very much for coming here. The debate continues, the discussion continues, and we'll be back next week at the same time. Thank you for watching.